Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and here's what we have in store for you this evening. Government courts traditional leaders in an effort to build consensus around communal land issues. Our guest is the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, ahead of a two-day summit she's hosting over the next 2 days. Following his re-election as the General Secretary of the country's third largest union federation, Zwelinzima Vavi talks to us about burying hatchets and refocusing SAFTU on its core business after an eventful period ahead of and during their three-day elective congress. The biggest union federation, COSATU, meanwhile, talks us through its thinking on some of the key issues affecting the country's workers today. That's before our last guest for the evening gives us a considered view of what the country's workers are confronted with right now and whether their union federations are up to the task. That and more coming up in today's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. The government is hosting a two-day summit starting tomorrow to reflect on the recommendations of the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture. The summit comes after an extensive nationwide consultation process with relevant stakeholders, which culminated into a position paper of government on land administration and land tenure in communal land areas in our country. And joining us on the line to discuss this is the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Toko Didiza. Good evening, Minister. Thanks very much for your time.
Good evening, Vuyo, and your viewership.
Let's start perhaps with understanding what exactly you hope to do or achieve over the next 2 days.
Let me start by saying, Vuyo, as you know, that there's an interministerial committee chaired by Deputy President. We reflected on some of the matters that had been ongoing in terms of the land reform issues in our country. In 2018, the traditional leaders through the National House, together with COGTA, had a conference where they reflected on a number of issues concerning traditional leaders and some of those relating to land matters and the Special Land Planning Act, which they had some concerns about and how that legislation applies in communal areas. Mm-hmm. Further to that, there was also a panel, a presidential panel on land and agriculture, which also made certain observations about the unfinished business when it comes to dealing with the tenure security of our country, particularly as it relates to communal areas, those areas that are under traditional communities, under their chiefs. So this summit looks at how can we deal with the issue of land governance in communal areas. What policy framework do we need to have that would actually outline how we manage land under traditional communities? South Africa still has got a dual land tenure system where on one hand you have got customary tenure and on the other freehold tenure, which really is drawn from the Roman Dutch law that emphasizes on individual land holding and leasehold. So indigenous tenurial system where there's collective ownership of certain areas while allowing individual household ownership of land where they've got residences, gardens, as well as fields, where they then come together on communal land for grazing and ancestral land for maybe spiritual and customs where these apply, are still under communal customary tenure system that is not actually codified in law. And this is what has actually is a problem that we're trying to fix on how do we actually codify this tenurial system and become part and parcel of our legal framework in South Africa.
Are those issues, Mr. Orr, in addition to, those issues, there is perhaps a reality, not so much because there is no clarity, but there is, shall we say, disagreement around some of the issues. In other words, it's not because people are not clear, it's just that they hold a different view. They think things should go in a different way. And in very, like summarily, for instance, I've had people from other provinces saying they are being treated differently from how the way the Ingonyama Trust, for example, is being treated. So, in other words, it's not so much an issue of clarity, but there are people who are saying, treat us in the same way you are treating, the other kingdom.
I don't think that is a correct version entirely. There might be those views, but the issue at hand is that communal areas of South Africa, as it stands, is under the custodianship of the Minister of Land Affairs. Even in Ingonyama Trust, where about 2 million hectares of land is under the trusteeship of Ingonyama in the space of Ingonyama Trust, still lacks, in my view, better land administration system, which will deal with issues of transparency on how land governance in these various areas is undertaken. When it comes to Ingonyama Trust, as you say, there is a legislation that set up Ingonyama Trust and also set up the Ingonyama Trust Board, whose responsibility is to assist the trustee in the management of the land under Ingonyama. Whereas you've got other communities such as Bafokeng, who also have got land that they govern, themselves and their support structures when it relates to the land under Bafokeng. But you've also got under other communities where they actually administer this land, but in a limited way, because where development has to happen in those communities, they still has to confer with the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development in as far as taking final decision about the development in those areas.
Now, you've already had, various consultation sessions in KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, the Eastern Cape, and here in Gauteng. And there is a piece I saw, I think, about a week ago in Daily Maverick, where even the manner in which the consultations were done was actually questioned, or in fact criticized. Now, given how delicate things tend to be, especially where traditional leaders are concerned, and where often people would say government often tiptoes around them, how genuine do you think this particular session, starting tomorrow, going on until Saturday, will be, and what exactly or precisely would you like to see as the outcome?
Well, maybe let me clarify the issue we are raising about tiptoeing. I don't think government is tiptoeing around Namakosi. Our constitution acknowledges the role and space of traditional leaders in our constitutional democracy. So that's one. And I don't think there's a debate around that. And government does indeed respect Amakosi as leaders in their communities. Equally so, government respects communities under traditional areas, including all South Africans. What we did in the consultation, firstly, we actually had a session where we had a study tour in Botswana, Uganda, and we did some desktop collectively to really assess what other countries have done in managing land under communal areas, what governance models are there, what land administration systems are there. We then came back and had consultation. That consultation started with the National House of Traditional Leaders. We actually met with the provincial houses. We met with communities under these traditional areas. We also met civil society organizations that are active in the rural landscape of our country. We brought in the academia and land experts because our view is that this matter will benefit from a wide range of consultations amongst those who stay in those areas, together with those who have worked in those areas, including government and in all three spheres. Because, you know, there are certain responsibilities that municipality has in respect of land in the communal areas and development. So as the provincial government and national government. So all of these spheres of government have been part of this process because we want to actually close the gap that Section 25(6) of our Constitution instructs us to do, to actually ensure that anybody who has an insecure land right in our country, insecure tenure system, that can be addressed.
Do you also intend, I can't imagine you thinking of doing otherwise, to also, you know, close the gap in people's understanding of, you know, who plays what role? And I'm asking this in the context of people who say that some people say they would prefer to be given a choice as to whether, for example, you know, who should administer their land rights, especially in cases where some feel that traditional authorities are imposed on them or may not recognize them for one reason or the other.
That's precisely why we are having this dialogue, because it allows all of those views to be vented, to be articulated, and actually persuasion to happen as to how we address these matters. And I must say that we go to this summit with an open mind, allowing that we will have a conversation which will finally determine what we need to do in our country. We also take lessons from Motlanthe Commission, who actually looked at our land reform process in our country, our land policies and legislation, and made particular observations. The land panel that was appointed by President Ramaphosa in 2018, who delivered its report in 2019, again, made certain observations even around this very tenural system that we're discussing today. It's important to appreciate also that actually in the South African context, you do have a legacy of our history where you had an intersect of Eurocentric Dutch, Roman Dutch law, for instance, that impacted on the indigenous systems. And therefore, there is this conflict that has continuously existed in our space. The issue is, as South Africa in a democratic state, how do we take that history and reform what will be acceptable to our citizens?
Well, I mean, you've spoken about, the importance, but there is the other issue, the issue of urgency.
Which is?
The issue of
Yes.
urgency, because, I mean, it is an emotive issue and often has been made a, political people have made a whole political football out of this thing. Only yesterday, given the theme of this year's, Africa Day commemorations, I mean, the theme was, food security and nutrition, and central to addressing that question on our continent is, of course, the issue of land. Now, and I'm also saying this on the back of what we all know, that we never really put timelines to these things. What have you done, or what is your thinking around that? Because we can't keep on having these conversations endlessly. We've got to go to the nub of it, deal with the issues, and where there's no agreement, a way has to be found for this process to move with speed.
Thank you very much, Vuyo. Indeed, I appreciate the concern that you are raising, which is a concern for all of us and members of our society. Our view is that out of the summit, we will then start with the policy development process, which will translate into a legislative framework. And we think that is important. As soon as we have an agreement, then we have to go down to work. But there are other issues that are not actually going to wait for, a longer time. Addressing the issue of spatial planning and the legislation that supports it, where there had been issues raised, that will be addressed again in the summit. And once we appreciate what the best practice, particularly in Limpopo, how that can be made applicable across the country, it's not going to take a long time. The issue of recordal of rights. Already our deeds registry system allow for the recordal of land rights, which is another important matter in terms of land administration in communal areas. As you know, that people who live in communal areas, in terms of their land rights being registered, it's actually non-existent. Siyazi nje ukuthi there it's a Vuyo Mvoko's family home, but if you were to go to the National Land Register, you wouldn't find that. So that will never wait for anything. We can actually do it like yesterday.
Mm-hmm. And have there been any conversations around fast-tracking the legislative process part? Because we know very well that piloting legislation, the mills there tend to grind very, very slowly. Have you had any conversations with presiding officers in Parliament, political parties, but also so that even that process is not held back by long-held views and opinions? We know about that debate that kind of failed spectacularly, and during the course of piloting this legislation, you may find that certain people go back to the old or resurrect the old debates, position they held previously, which may even delay things further. What I'm asking in a nutshell, Minister, is whether you are having conversations with everyone to make sure that when it comes to piloting legislation, this process is going to move with speed.
Yes, we are. Actually, we had invited our portfolio committee on land as well as the select committee, because they will be central in the piloting of this legislation. We have received confirmation from the select committee. Unfortunately, the portfolio committee on land in the National Assembly is having an oversight visit, but we will brief them and appraise them of the outcome of the summit. But they are aware because they have received the report and the recommendations of the panel on land and agriculture, which was tabled in 2019. They are also aware of the Motlanthe Commission. So in terms of reference document and the debate that has been going, and the briefings that we have been given to the portfolio committee on the consultations that we have been having, I am confident that they would work as the legislature in conducting their responsibility as lawmakers, understand the urgency and the importance of dealing with the issue of customary tenure in our system.
Okay, we'll see how that goes, Minister. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Minister Thoko Didiza, of course, they are hosting that two-day summit starting tomorrow to reflect on the recommendations of the Presidential Advisory Panel on land reform and agriculture. It comes, of course, after extensive nationwide consultations around a number of issues, not just, the land administration and land tenure in communal land areas only. Now, after the break, a massive show of confidence in him as he gets re-elected to lead the young but ambitious Union Federation once again. But can Zwelinzima Vavi rise above the petty squabbles he and his comrades have been engaged in and refocus rather, SAFTU? That's what we're asking next. Zwelinzima Vavi is my guest. Well, after a massive show of confidence in him, as the Federation re-elected him to lead it, Zwelinzima Vavi, of course, now has to work with the very same people, some of whom tried to hound him out, and refocus the Federation and make sure that it does what it is supposed to do for its members, and the petty squabbles that they have been involved in the run-up to and during conference are put aside. Well, Zwelinzima Vavi is on the line to talk to us about what he plans to do now that the workers of belonging to SAFTU have put so much confidence in him. Good evening, sir. Congratulations on your re-election. What's on your to-do list?
Thank you. Good evening, Vuyo, and to everybody else watching your program tonight. And we came out of this Congress as a collective leadership of the Federation, determined to heal the Federation, as the President of the Federation, Ruth Ntlakose, called on us to do in the clarion call as she was closing the Congress today. Look, we came from a brink of a total disaster where everything that was dreamed of by workers in 2017, when we were forming SAFTU, almost went up in smoke, as the leadership couldn't just manage the divisions and the points of differences amongst themselves. And in a very matured way, reflecting the experience and the wealth of knowledge amongst the leaders of the Federation, we pulled from that, and we coming out with a clear understanding that the principal task of the Federation immediately is to ensure that the cracks that emerged and that played themselves out so embarrassingly over the past few weeks of a campaign leading to this Congress are confronted, dealt with, put aside, and put behind, so that we can once and again focus on the external challenges the Federation SAFTU is facing. And that external challenge is that it must provide effective service, effective protection to workers in the shop floor. It must reach out to the informal sector workers, to the precarious forms of employment, the informal sector workers, and the poverty-stricken workers, the working poor who go to work every day but who remain trapped in humiliating levels of poverty. We must reach out to the youth who, as we know, 77% of them are unemployed, at least those who are below the age of 77. We must reach out to women leading the protest actions in the streets of our country. As you know, in South Africa, we have 5 major protest actions a single day. We must reach out to the unemployed in general, to other progressive civil society, but more importantly, we must reach out to other federations and call for principled unity and call for unity in action. We're encouraged by very excellent examples of unity that have been displayed in a number of strikes that we have seen in the recent past. As we speak, the AMCU and the NUM workers are in a joint strike, something that you would have never thought that will ever happen. NIHAO and PSA are in a joint strike in SARS. The NUM and NUMSA were in a joint strike in the at ESCOM, and there are quite a number of examples that say to us and to the rest of the federation, but it is possible that even though we can remain in our federation, we can agree on what we can practically do together to express solidarity and to engage together in advancing the interest of the workers. And this is more important today because the public sector workers, as you know, are starting the negotiations. And we hope that the public sector workers can see exactly how NUM and NUMSA won the battle at ESCOM and how FAU and Kiwusa battled for months against the employers at Milco, and that it is possible that they can also do the same to ensure that they do not get the current wage freeze as a permanent feature in the collective bargaining system in the public sector.
Okay, now, I mean, of course, I mean, the intention is one thing, but doing it is quite another. And I wanted to share with us some thoughts as to how you're going to achieve this in principle unity and so on. But before I do that, I just want clarity on something you said earlier. In other words, you're saying that what brought you to the brink of total disaster was not brought about by fundamental differences between and among yourselves. It's only how you managed these tensions, but they don't go deep. In other words, you managed to find one another and identified the problem that made you not to do so in the run-up to this conference. So that is done. You're not going to go back there. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. Tell me one organization that doesn't have a difference of opinion between its leaders, top or bottom. Which organization doesn't, from time to time, develop tensions and based on different experiences that everyone is facing on the ground. And the issue is how we manage the differences. And I think that we were caught wanting when it comes to managing the differences. And as a result of that, there were attempts to eliminate the leaders by just throwing mud on them, including corruption allegations, and hoping that that will discount and them as opponents in the Congress, and therefore win an easier battle that you will normally have to face if you didn't have corruption allegations against them. So those are signs of what we want not to go to: the cutthroat politics, the levels of intolerance that destroy individuals and organizations, and that defocuses the organization away from the central issues that members are expecting us to deal with, the issues of their wages and issues of their conditions of employment in the workplace, and generally to intervene in a societal debate to ensure that at the macro level, we influence government policies, we influence the country's policies, and we influence the employers, we influence the international institutions, all in favor of advancing the interest of the working people.
Yeah, well, it's now that you speak of societal problems and your involvement and having to have a voice there, you're reminding me of some of the things that were said or that were ascribed to the reality we then saw in the run-up to and during your conference. Some people speculated that, among the sources of your problems was, for example, the move to form a political party attached to whether it's NUMSA or your federation broadly, which was a non-starter. And then you would have heard people speculating that was one source. of problems. Ibrahim Harvey, whom you know earlier, who was on our sister program, The Full View, I don't know if we can play that bite where he came up with something else, saying it had nothing to do with anything but petty little squabbles between you and Evan Jim. Can we play that bite very quickly?
One expected, after, the expulsion from Vavi and Nomsa from COSATU, that SAFTU, I attended its launch, was something that was going to happen that would make a significant difference. And down the line, I was looking at a reunification of COSATU and SAFTU, which is what I believe should happen, And just 2-3 weeks ago, I had to call Beggy for something else, the COSATU General Secretary. He said, Ibrahim, we want that unity. The thing is, who's going to take the initiative to do it, to set it in motion? But a very serious setback for SAFTU unity and broader working class unity, and certainly for the relationship between SAFTU and COSATU. What happened, at the SAFTU Congress is really very, very unfortunate. And it's been coming on for a long time, for a couple years, and I've been writing a lot about this SAFTU born, following it a lot. And I can tell you, the fact that they wanted to suspend Vavi, the timing is very interesting. You must look at it. This attempt to suspend him, we don't know what the details are, and whether he was guilty or not, but it comes just before weeks, 6-7 weeks before the Congress. I found that timing very, very interesting. But more than anything else, you'll see the media reports, they say throughout the SAFTU Congress, they were calling for people who are wanting Vavi out of the way. It echoes the fact that there is deepening tensions, and I know both of them. Between Jim and Vavi, your biggest problem in SAFTU is not the lack of unity among the affiliates, etc. I even think that you could have a reunification between SAFTU and COSATU. The biggest problem in SAFTU is the relationship between Vavi and Jim.
Is that the biggest problem in SAFTU? Your relationship with Evan Jim?
No. The SAFTU Congress roundly rejected that view today, that the 17 affiliated unions of the Federation could be reduced into nothing but just some tools in a theater of a battle between two powerful individuals in the Federation. No, we reject that. And the tensions in SAFTU can't be reduced into a relationship between two individuals. Yes, it is absolutely critical and important that relationships between all the leaders of the Federation must be such that people can work together, even in the context of them not agreeing on everything under the sun. But to say the whole issue is about two individuals is an exaggeration that we are totally rejecting.
But quickly,
there are political and ideological differences that exist in the Federation. There are big debates about issues, for example, such as the notions of the mass workers movement, which is a resolution of the founding Congress of SAFTU, the need to debate the creation of a mass workers party, and in a context where NUMSA have already spearheaded a creation of a socialist revolutionary workers party. And the issue of a revolutionary workers party in the context of South Africa's state of the working class itself that have been butchered and restructured by the capitalist class is generating a necessary discussion in the Federation as to what is the best option to move forward. But those discussions, as I'm saying, could have been better managed within the Federation instead of them spilling out and then playing themselves out in the Congress floor, and or certainly leading to smear campaigns that we have seen in the paper. The attempt, for example, to put me on suspension on the most frivolous allegations you can imagine. Somebody saying that you must be suspended because you bought airtime for provincial structures to join the National Executive Committee for 1,000 or 1,800. Where have you seen that? And but that's part of a hit that is generated on the eve of the National Congress. We are very happy that this Congress defied those negativities and the comrades this today embraced each other and were told in no uncertain terms by their affiliates that there will no longer be tolerance of divisions between individuals or between the national office bearers themselves that will then suddenly spill over to the National Executive Committee and the general membership.
How do you describe your relationship with Evan Jim now?
The reason why there's so much attention to that relationship is because people know the relationship that we have enjoyed from time immemorial. With the guys from the Eastern Cape, we are the militants. We had a relationship that transcended just a brother into a serious confidence to one another. We family friends. He knows my children. I know his family in and out. And I know everything, and he knows everything about me. So as soon as there is some demonstrable tensions that play themselves out in the meeting, that becomes a huge focus, sometimes exaggerated to the point that that itself then begins to tell that all is falling apart. No, there have been differences. For example, we disagree on the issue of whether South Africa needs a vanguard party or it needs a working class mass movement and that can unite workers and working class formations, NGOs, and the lower levels of the middle class into a single movement of the working class under the leadership of the working class to transform South Africa and into a socialist-orientated endings of the current crisis of the capitalist system. He agrees on the end, but he believes that a socialist revolutionary party and under the leadership of the proletariat is the instrument that is more effective to advance the same objectives. And so there's clear need to continue that discussion inside the structures of the federation. There's no shame in people disagreeing with one another. What is shameful is when people cannot sit down and engage in a discussion in order to find one another and to develop some conclusions that advances the overall cause of the interest of the working class.
Otherwise, the two of you are cool and you're on talking terms.
Look, we have to do everything coming from this National Congress to reach out to one another. I've made that commitment and to make sure that all of the previous tensions, schisms are buried in the interest of both NUMSA members and the SAFTU members as a whole, but more importantly, in the interest of unity of the working class. And but I don't want us to continuously exaggerate that issue, which we are openly admitting as being the source of all of the crises of divisions in the federation, because that would be an exaggeration.
Now, have you put together, lastly, I mean, as a Congress, a program of action, or have you been given any sort of specific orders as to how you're going to reach out to other federations, how you're going to reach out to all these other vulnerable sections of South African society, the unemployed, exploited worker? How are you going to capitalize or to build on what your AMCUs and your NUMs have done or have been doing at Sibanye Stillwater, for example? How are you going to build upon what your PSAs and your NHAUs you're saying are doing or have done at SARS and the broader sort of civil society space?
We have been given clear marching orders. Focus outward, not internally. Build unity with the working class, and ensure that there is unity in action with other federations and other unions, support all the struggles of the workers, irrespective of which federations workers fall into. Be non-sectarian in your approach. Reach out to AMCO and the NUM in their current battles with Stillwater as we speak. Reach out to NIHAO and PSA, coordinate more effectively the collective bargaining process that have started in the public sector, centralized bargaining chamber, and make sure that the demand of a 10% is one, and that austerity programs that the government have imposed leading to the wage freeze that have now lasted 3-4 years in the public service is reversed, and ensure that we focus not just on wages and conditions of employment, but ensure that we can unite workers with the other members of society to demand that all vacancies in the public service are filled, to ensure that government reverses its austerity programs that is leading to it not to be able to effectively fight against crime, as police stations lack the most basic resources, including vans and other equipment to fight crime. Make sure that our hospitals are better equipped, both with human resources, but more importantly with infrastructure, and many other battles that we should be fighting that we have not been fighting. Frankly, for 4 years, we have allowed divisions to paralyze the federation, and we're happy to inform our members that from now on, that paralysis is going to be something of the past. They're going to be seeing us in the streets, left, right, and center, every part of South Africa.
Okay, well, you'll be happy to know that COSATU is saying similar things or making similar utterances. They had a briefing earlier today where they briefed us as journalists, took us through some issues and what their thinking was around those issues. And our colleague Ntantla Khatlane went along and brought us this report.
Reflecting on the sins of Workers' Day, following its 3-day Central Executive Committee meeting, COSATU says it intends on convening an urgent meeting with its alliance partners to discuss issues affecting workers. The Labour Federation says the May Day incident where ANC President Ramaphosa was forced off stage by mine workers before he delivered his speech is concerning. COSATU regards this as a sign of chronic weakness in the ANC-led government.
The disruption exposed the chronic weak state of the ANC, its league and the alliance in general, both in terms of organizational cohesion and strategic orientation.
4 months to go to its 14th National Congress, COSATU remains mum on their preferred candidate at the ANC elective conference scheduled to be held in December. The Labour Federation says focus should be put on closing the gap between South Africans and the ANC.
People on the ground are losing confidence in the capacity of the ANC to drive transformation. Another challenge is the deliberate hollowing out of the concept of developmental state by the ANC government. On one hand, there's a continuity with the neoliberal agenda in the state, while at the same time there's a talk of a move in the direction of a developmental state. The reality is that South African state has been taken over the private interest.
COSATU regards the booing incident in Rustenburg as regrettable and says it's yet to meet the ANC and SACP to discuss what transpired that day.
We have not met the ANC. We have not met the party. Remember, it is not just the ANC that could not speak. It is both the party and the ANC that could not deliver the messages of support. We have not met them simply because we had other programs that we were dealing with.
With COSATU's elective congress taking place in September, the Federation says it will put more effort in revitalizing and strengthening the framework of improving services for the working class. Ntantla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, as you heard there, I mean, COSATU making similar utterances to that Zwelinzima Vavi in our interview was talking about, and I want to thank him for his time. But I want to move on to Michael Bagrain, who is a labor analyst, who was listening through to that interview I was having with Zwelinzima Vavi. And you also, Michael, listened to this package that Nhlanhla Kgatlana brought together on the back of that media briefing by COSATU. What do you make of, how these two federations are now coming across? Do you think that they have their, finger on the pulse of, the working class and their needs in this country? Michael, can you hear me? Okay, it looks like we've lost Michael. Zwelinzima Vavi, just your thoughts from listening to what Nhlanhla put together there from that COSATU media briefing?
They are spot on. They are spot on that workers have lost faith on the ANC and its ability to address even the most basic needs of the South Africa's economy, for jobs that are paying a living wage, for reindustrialization of the country, for addressing the triple crisis of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, corruption added there, and that they have not addressed the issues that regenerate poverty, inequality, such as the state of our basic education, even universities, and not addressing the fact that we are unable to compete with our region and, or worse of all, with the rest of the world. When you compare our kids' ability to read and to compete at the level of mathematics and all of that. So all of these challenges are erupting in the face of the ANC government and leading to what you then saw on May Day in Rustenburg. And what surprises us, though, is that COSATU continue to say the same things, but continue to think that they can, as they weaken and as they themselves get discredited in the eyes of the workers who are going through hell, through attacks on their rights, through neoliberalism, austerity, wage freezes, but they still keep on believing that they can still change things from within. When that strategy has been applied for 28 years, with us also participating, but dismally failed to address the most basic needs of workers, jobs, poverty, inequality, is something that has been touching all workers in our country under the ANC government. Okay.
Michael, just I hope we have you back now. Just listening to the two union federations, does it sound to you like there's been a significant change of course, that sooner rather than later they may be able to find one another in the interests of workers of the country?
Thank you, and I apologize for cutting myself off. Yes, I think at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of movement. The unions at the end of the day are, in fact, the backbone of our labor movement. And without the unions, we're going to have real problems in South Africa. I strongly believe, though, that the unions are diminishing to a large degree. The reality is, once again, the workforce is shrinking. And with the workforce shrinking, the unions are running like a business. Without members, they don't get money in. And so there's a lot of infighting, and there will always be the infighting. The other real issue is that the tripartite alliance is completely broken down. It doesn't make sense for COSATU to say they want to meet now with the ANC, who have almost destroyed them. And also at the situation between SAFTU and COSATU is not going to be cured. That I don't see happening in the short term. Maybe in the long term.
So you reckon they have a better chance, kind of working together, finding common programs and that kind of thing, than really talking, a serious coming together?
I don't think it's going to happen. As you've seen, even within SAFTU, there was that argument, a very strong argument between two big bulls. And I can't see Mr. Vavi getting enticed back into COSATU's fold. I mean, you remember he was fired, he was expelled. And you remember that the largest union within COSATU was expelled as well. That wound is still very raw. And even in the interest of workers, I can't see the leadership coming together. Maybe in 10 years' time, and it might be too late. I think at the end of the day, it would be good if we saw one strong union and one strong union umbrella, maybe under the umbrella of COSATU or SAFTU. But this is going to take a long time. I don't know if we've got the time as the country waiting. They have to kill that tripartite alliance, because that's standing in the way of any serious discussion between the two big umbrella bodies. It doesn't help to have the biggest employer in the country in alliance with the biggest trade union movement. And there's no love lost. You can see the workers on the ground have spoken very loudly. That May Day rally wasn't a blip. It wasn't a thing that was unthought. It was well thought out, and they threw the president out of that meeting. We can call it what you want. He had to get out of there. He wasn't allowed to speak. The workers on the ground were speaking. And maybe that's the first time in this new democracy that our workers are finding their feet and saying that we're not going to dance to the tune of a political party. And I think it's quite right that SAFTU has not joined in with that, because that tripartite alliance is dangerous. Okay. It's dangerous to the extent that they get sold out by the ANC every time.
All right, and that's where we're going to leave it, Michael. Thank you very much for your time, Labour analyst Michael Bagrain, but also SAFTU's re-elected General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi, completing that conversation there about the state of the country's workers and their union federations. And that's our show for tonight. So join us again tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock sharp. Have a good night.